Arizona Wildlife Views, brought to you by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and the Heritage Fund, lottery dollars working for wildlife. Some projects made possible by the Sportfish and Wildlife Restoration Fund.
Find birds. Let's
go. Good evening and welcome to Arizona Wildlife Views. I'm your host, Jim Harkin. On tonight's show, we meet up with some writers and photographers who love sharing their work with you. Then we head to rattlesnake country and we meet some folks with some jobs that just might not be for everybody. But first tonight, take a look at this strand of barbed wire. It's used extensively across the Southwest because it's perfect for our western conditions. But what do you do when you want to get rid of this stuff? Well, tonight we'll introduce you to some volunteers who are helping to remove quite a bit of what's become known as the devil's rope.
Oh. One more?
We're on the Burro Reservation Hayground allotment, and what we're doing is removing unneeded barbed wire fence.
A rancher wanted to pull cattle off this area, the recreation area, and some of his pastures were not as good for cattle as they were for wildlife. And then we sat down and realigned the pastures, took the good grazing areas and left those in the cattle base, and pulled these overstory areas and riparian areas out of the grazing base, so that the cattle won't be in the riparian areas and throughout this thick forested area where the wildlife is better suited for wildlife.
Removing the fence is a simple but formidable proposition. Barbed wire is typically double-stranded, 12.5 gauge, zinc-coated galvanized steel. The first step is to remove the staples that hold the wire to the wood uprights of the thorny fence. The wood will eventually degrade, so it's simply tossed aside. After a stretch is complete, workers come back and remove the stays from the metal poles, allowing the strand to simply hang loose. Next, one end is fed into a spooler and rolled up.
John will be back here before.
Once they get it running, of course. When the strand is done, repeat with the next and the next and the next, and they just keep going. 10 more miles to roll up today.
We actually ended up compensating the rancher to retire his permit, and then the Forest Service wrote an MOU between the Arizona Elk Society and the Forest Service to retire the area, along with agreements on what would happen with the interior fencing, which was what we're removing today.
Once that permit was purchased, it was waived back to the forest. Now the forest, because of the difficulty of grazing in these areas and all the conflicts associated with these riparian habitats and the recreational conflicts, has decided to not graze cattle in this area. It just wasn't feasible anymore.
This project here is actually a third in a series of removing fences. There's about 35 miles of fence here. We've removed about 25 miles so far. Game and Fish has brought in some other guys, some other scout troops and things to do some of the work. Today we have volunteers from the Arizona Elk Society, Arizona Game and Fish Department, the U.S. Forest Service, and we had a scout troop from St. David, Arizona come all the way up here to help us out. They heard about it through the internet and thought it'd be a good thing to do to come up and help some wildlife habitat.
And the Elk Society will take all the help they can get. 35 miles of 4-strand barbed wire, that's a lot of rolled steel.
Yeah, the Arizona Elk Society has been just a phenomenal partner with us here on the Springerville Ranger District. They come to us very open-minded, willing to help, and they have a very broad perspective. They're a society to mainly focus on improving elk habitat. However, what they're doing for us here on the Springerville Ranger District has tremendously helped us resolve some fisheries issues, some conflicts with recreationalists, and has just improved the aesthetics of this area. We really appreciate their efforts and what they're doing here. Not only did they get together and purchase these permits which made all this happen. But they're not afraid to roll up their sleeves and come out here and do the hard work also, and have a lot of respect for that. This approach of working with partners has been tremendously successful, and we hope other partners can jump on board and do these type of things. The permittees are willing. They see a situation that's becoming unfeasible for them, so they're very supportive of this. We have volunteers that come out and understand the importance of this work, and these type of projects where we have all the partners coming in willingly is just a win-win situation for everybody, and we want to continue this type of efforts and encourage other groups to think broad-minded like the Arizona Elk Society does.
After suffering an assortment of cuts and bruises and a whole lot of sore muscles, one has to wonder why these volunteers give up their weekend to come here and work so hard.
I guess you would call it a passion. You know, we like to see elk habitat or wildlife habitat in general improved. You know, holding more animals, the animal's healthier. You tear down a fence, you're not killing an animal, a calf doesn't get stuck in the fence. It's kind of a feel-good thing. It just, as a hunter, as a conservationist, a lot of us just want to give something back to the wildlife habitat, to the state of Arizona.
Arizona Wildlife Views TV show has been on the air since the late 1960s, and that's quite a long time. But there's another Arizona Wildlife Views that's been enjoyed by the public even longer than that.
The department authorized a magazine first in 1947, and yeah, so it's been 60 plus years that it's been around, and since then it's been discontinued, then reinstated, different formats. You know, it was like a newsletter when it first started, and then it was reduced to like a 6 by 9 inches and a tabloid newspaper, and now finally the format that it's in now. And in 1959, it went through a name change. It was originally Wildlife News, and now it's Wildlife Views.
The award-winning magazine is published bi-monthly by the Arizona Game and Fish Department and contains articles and photographs aimed at a large cross-section of Arizona outdoor enthusiasts.
You get a sense of everything that's around here just by listening to that, and that tells you what the environment's like, because you know.
The point of it is to talk to readers who are interested in wildlife and want to learn more about it, whatever their level of interest or their level of knowledge of the natural world might be. So we try to do articles from sort of basic introductory level articles about this is what Arizona wildlife is like, and this is the kinds of animals you'll see here and the kinds of birds you'll find here, to a little bit different articles about the kinds of research that the Arizona Game and Fish Department does and sharing the news that they've learned in the wild. And we just try to address a diverse readership and hopefully hold their interest.
I think the Game and Fish Department needs to publish Arizona Wildlife Views because we are pretty much the only magazine in the state that deals with the state's wildlife. And we cover it in a variety of ways. We cover wildlife conservation issues. We cover watchable wildlife, which encompasses, you know, specific species that you can see in Arizona and also places to go that you can see these animals. We also cover like outdoor recreation opportunities as well: boating, fishing, hunting, shooting sports. So I think, we're here to entertain our subscribers as well as educate them about kind of what the department does and, you know, and how it manages the state's wildlife.
Publishing 6 new full-color, top-quality issues every year is a demanding task for this small staff, so it takes a lot of planning and pooling of resources to make it work.
The associate editor, Julie Hammonds, and I get together about twice a year, and we have meetings where we try to calendar out the following year. So we're always trying to work at least 6 months to a year in advance. We go over queries that we receive from freelance writers and queries that we also receive from in-house writers, and we definitely try to encourage department employees to write for us, because who knows better than, you know, the subject matter than the people who actually work for the department. Then at that point, you know, each issue we start the editing process with the articles and then the art selection. We work very closely with our staff photographer, George. So once we finish with the editing process, the articles and all the artwork goes over to the graphics artist, who then designs the magazine and makes it look pretty. And then we work with a color company who color corrects all of our images. We send them basically the raw images, and they color correct them, you know, for contrast and brightness and all that stuff. And then once that's completed, all the final files go to our printer, which is located here in Phoenix. That's a pretty neat process. So at that point, I pretty much leave it in their hands because I have some skill, but not quite that much skill. But what we're doing when we go down there is we just want to make sure that the color looks good. That's definitely not a time for us to be checking for typos and stuff like that. So we're watching them, you know, they'll pull sheets off the press, and then they'll look and check the color to make sure like all the color bars match and everything. And that's a time when we can look at it as well and just say, you know, I think we need a little bit more detail here. But once you make those moves on certain photos, it really does affect like 8 other pages. You know, so you have to be, you can't expect them to totally radically change one image, because that totally radically changes, you know, a bunch of other images. So we just go down there to, you know, just to make sure that it's running smoothly, that they're not missing anything from us, and that, you know, that the color looks good.
Once the printing is complete, the finished magazine is ready to be sent out to its many readers, but not before the publication staff gets a chance to see it first. From the first day they start working full-time on a particular issue until the day it reaches a subscriber, about 4 months have passed.
And it took, I would say, 6 or 8 months to produce this one story on Cave Creek Canyon.
Yeah.
And to actually see it in print is quite a thrill.
Yes. It's pretty cool because by the time we get it, like we've moved on to something else and we're working on other projects, so to see it again and to see it all put together in one package is pretty cool. Because normally we're just dealing with sheets of paper and this and that, or looking at, you know, the layouts on computer screens, so to have it all put together, it's really exciting.
The Arizona Game and Fish Department's small publication staff doesn't produce only the magazine. Here, Heidi and Julie, along with photographer George Andraco and administrative assistant Diane Howard, are selecting photographs for the annual Game and Fish calendar. It's just one of the many publications that pass through their hands.
We produce all the regulations for the department, the hunting and trapping regulations, fishing regulations, all like the waterfowl and dove and sandhill crane regulations. We're in charge of books and just brochures and posters, and we pretty much work on a little bit of everything.
Still, the Arizona Wildlife Views magazine is the heart and soul of this department, and the care that goes into each magazine has a lot to do with the people who work on it.
I grew up with a dad who really liked to get out camping and hiking, and he shared that interest with me. So I've always been the nature girl. And I've also always been a reader and a writer, and working for Arizona Wildlife Views magazine, I get to combine those interests because I can pursue my love for the natural world and write about it. It's really the best job I could ever imagine having.
I find that I'm still constantly learning new things. You know, when people submit articles or when we're working on developing a new issue, it's just I'm reading the articles and I'm still learning things, and so I find that to be the most rewarding.
The magazine earned several awards this year for photography, design, and writing. Staff photographer George Andraco's photo of a regal horned lizard was selected as one of the top 5 photos published in a magazine in the Western States in 2007. And associate editor Julie Hammonds wrote 2 feature stories in 2007 that earned first-place prizes, one about women's participation in shooting sports, the other about Ramsey Canyon Preserve in southern Arizona.
To me, there's being out in the natural world, and then there's writing about it. And you can't do both at the same time. You have to go out and experience the natural world fully and enjoy it as a human being first. And then you bring those reflections and experiences and feelings back to your writing desk and sit down and try and put into words what really ultimately can't be put into words. But it's really a good challenge to try and capture the feelings that you had or the things that you saw and share them with somebody who doesn't have those feelings and isn't seeing what you saw. And the times when you can get that vision across and somebody will come up to you and say, "Hey, I read your story, I really liked it, it made me want to go there," that's when I know I've done good writing.
Arizona Wildlife Views magazine has done a lot of stories over the years, but here's one they haven't done. Who you gonna call when you want to get your rattlesnake moved?
The Desert Museum is different than most zoological institutions that I visited. We're not trying to recreate a desert environment, we're in a desert environment. So it's not a matter of, well, let's pretend it's a desert and put some snakes in here. We're attached to desert all around, and so these snakes come in here. And in fact, I think that the Desert Museum is kind of like got a little sign out there, Eat at Joe's, because it has more shade, more plant cover, more water, more rodents, more of everything that snakes like. So to think that we could exclude snakes from this area is ridiculous.
Have a great time.
When I came in '91, I came up with the idea and got Craig to help me with the project to start marking the rattlesnakes, because before they had just been capturing them and relocating them elsewhere, and we thought that it'd be a really good idea to maybe figure out what our sexes are, what our seasonality is, whether we're seeing the same snake 20 times or 20 different snakes. We also wanted to see if there are certain areas on museum grounds where there were more rattlesnakes than other areas.
It's a visitor or other people on the grounds, they're the ones that actually initiate the process by finding a snake and calling our base station, and then the base station actually pages the herpetology department.
And then we hop in the cart and we go to the location.
But if it's still there and it's in a place that could cause some sort of risk to humans or animals, we'll collect the animal.
We used tongs when we were collecting on the grounds instead of a hook, because you have more control over the snake. We put them in the box, close and lock the box, and bring it back to our building. We label the box with the snake, the species where we collected at the time and the date, and whether it was a recapture or not. If it's a new snake, then we have to actually restrain it with the clear plastic tubes.
We select a tube that's slightly larger than the size of the diameter of the head and use that as a restraint. So there's about 2 inches of water put into a trash can, the snake is put into the can. Its tendency is for it to try to come back out of the can. You present the tube to it repeatedly until it chooses it as an option for escape. Once it's far enough up the tube, then you can actually trap the snake in the tube, and that eliminates any risk of being bitten. One person then is responsible for monitoring the snake, making sure that it's doing okay and that it's not getting out of the tube, turning around, anything like that. And the other person actually goes through measuring the snake. We determine its gender by using a metal probe, which you slide that on the inside through the cloaca towards the back of the tail. With males, the probe will usually go in about 10 to 14 scales in depth, with females usually 3 or less. Then we go through the process of actually marking it. The first thing we do is to insert a pit tag, which is a little passive integrated transponder about the size and shape of a rice grain, and it's injected just under the skin.
And that will read an alphanumeric number, so that then we have a very specific ID for it.
And then you seal that opening with a skin adhesive. A little dab of glue. We also photocopy the pattern of the tail to get an idea of some corroborating evidence. When it comes back from a distance, you can usually tell by these different tail patterns which individual you're looking at, if you have something you can refer to.
So we got 3 bands, 2 complete bands, one that's slightly offset.
And the final thing is to actually put paint on the rattle.
The paint colors correspond to different numbers, so like 0 might be red and 1 might be blue or something.
So if a snake comes back, you can tell just by looking at those colors which one it is, and you don't have to go through the process of restraining the snake again and stressing the animal and having more risk to the people involved.
All right.
After the animal is processed, if we actually go through making any kind of a puncture wound, we keep them overnight to make sure that there is no bleeding or any other kind of problems that occur overnight.
And then we'll release it.
That one came from east of the underwater viewing area.
And what we do with the museum is to break it up into 4 sections or quadrants. If the snake came from one quadrant, it goes back to that same quadrant. It can't go back to the exact same spot where people are, but fairly close by.
When we first began the project, we were relocating some short distances. We had 2 sites that were 1 mile away and 1 site that was 2.5 miles away. And we were getting snakes back from the 1 mile away sites, or one of them more than the other, but they were coming back. But then other people started doing some studies on it, and they found that snakes that were relocated far away from their home range area, they were just always totally aimless and wandering, and that they eventually died. And so then we did start relocating closer just to see, and we were getting more recaptures.
There's probably about 140 of those snakes that we saw one time, released it, and haven't seen it since. Then if you look at it, the number of recaptures, there's many of them that are caught 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, up to about 6, 7, 8 times. We have a lot of snakes that we've seen that many times. And then there's a few individuals that we've seen in as little as 2 years, 31 times.
Also, there are certain snakes that have certain areas of the grounds they like. I mean, one snake we cut out of the same birdcage wire 3 times, and it was the very same birdcage. So there's areas they like. I mean, we're getting to know certain individuals for certain parts of the grounds.
Got it? Okay. When you look at rattlesnakes, you have to look at potential versus probability. Potential is extremely severe. People have died from rattlesnake bites. There are people every year that do so. Only about 10 or 15 in the U.S. die each year. In Arizona alone, we have about 150 to 250 bites that are recorded, and we have less than 1 death a year. So the probability of dying from a bite is extremely remote, but the possibility is there. And somehow people seem to confuse possibility with probability, so anything that can possibly cause us harm that we don't understand, like snakes, must be something that is a bad thing.
Well, I think people just like snakes, they just don't know anything about them. I mean, you're afraid of what you don't know, and if they educated themselves, I think most people would learn to appreciate them anyway.
For the 176 times that we actually had somebody that contacted us last year and said we need to go move a snake, I would guess there's probably hundreds of times people went by the same snakes before it was ever noticed.
Nobody has been bitten on the grounds by a rattlesnake.
Even though they have the potential to inflict great bodily harm, including death, it's unlikely to occur, and quite frankly, that's the last thing that they want to do. What they're trying to do is avoid something that, on a scale based on what we would see, is like an elephant approaching us. There's this huge mammal that might cause them harm, and they're trying to figure out how to react to the situation and get away from it.
You just have to learn a whole different strategy for living around rattlesnakes. I mean, you know, when you live in the city, you don't cross the street without looking both directions. You know, there are things you learn in the city that you have to do. When you live in the desert, you just have to learn other things too. Don't walk out at night barefoot or in sandals. You know, don't ever put any part of your body where you can't see what's going on. You know, don't walk through thick, deep brush. Don't reach your hands under rocks or into lumber piles. You just learn a different set of rules. And if you see a rattlesnake, just back up and go the other direction. They don't come charging after you.
When I first started working with rattlesnakes, it was one of those things that I was like, I really don't want to do this, but I learned how to do it. You always have to respect the potential, so you work with implements that keep you from being too close to them.
I tell people reptiles is the safest area in the zoo. I mean, elephants kill people. With reptiles, you can stay 3 feet, 6 feet away. I mean, you can stay a safe distance away. You have the tubes that you can safely restrain, but you know, other animals, they're more dangerous.
It's amazing to watch how people interact with wildlife and how many different predispositions they have when it comes to talking about rattlesnakes especially.
Rattlesnakes are predators. They're keeping populations in check of rodents and things, and they have the right to be here.
But I have an intense fascination and admiration for how these animals fit into a desert environment and what they do for a living.
Elvis has left the building.
And that's our show for this evening. If you'd like any more information about anything you saw on the show, go to our website at azgfd.gov. For producers Carol Lind and Gary Schaefer, I'm your host Jim Harkin. We'll see you next time.